where the situation in Victoria has moved forward overnight. Another 11 local COVID-19 cases, bringing the cluster in Melbourne's north to 26 cases. And as you'd be aware, Victoria has just announced that all of Victoria will enter into a 7-day stage 3 lockdown from midnight tonight. In response, we will be declaring all of Victoria a high-risk location from 2 p.m. today. This means that after 2 p.m. this afternoon, you can't travel to Tasmania if you've spent time in Victoria in the previous 14 days, unless you are approved as an essential traveller by the Deputy State Controller. The current Tassie travel pass will be cancelled at 2 p.m. today, and anyone wishing to enter will need to reapply through the Good to Go system and seek an exemption. Tasmanian residents who are in Victoria at the moment can apply for essential traveller status to return home, but if approved, they'll be required to quarantine at a suitable premises on arrival for 14 days. If they don't have a suitable premise, they will be required to quarantine in government-designated accommodation at their own cost. Anyone who arrives before the declaration takes effect at 2 p.m. today will be allowed to enter Tasmania as long as they've not been in the Whittlesea local government area or any of the declared high-risk premises in Victoria that have been visited by COVID-19 cases. So I remind anyone arriving before 2 p.m. and anyone who has come to Tasmania and is here now, having been in the low-risk areas of Victoria since the 6th of May, how important it is that they monitor themselves for COVID-19 symptoms. If you have any symptoms at all, even mild, isolate immediately and book a test with the Public Health Hotline. And importantly, keep checking the list of high-risk premises at www.coronavirus.tas.gov.au, as more sites I expect will be added as cases are discovered and contact tracing in Victoria continues. If you've spent time at any of the sites at the specified dates and times, these are the high-risk premises, self-isolate immediately and call the Public Health Hotline for further advice. Now, obviously, the situation in Victoria is generating increased calls to the Public Health Hotline, so please be patient. At the moment, I understand the wait time is only around 5 to 6 minutes. We will and have stood up the full capacity of those centres at the moment, but we will take steps if need be to put on surge staff if and when we require them. And at the moment, obviously, the hotline staff are working hard to provide information, book tests and vaccinations, as well as answer questions for a large number of people. So please be patient, and if you can't hold or wait for the period that you're being asked to wait for, please call back at the earliest opportunity, but remain self-isolating until then. Now, as I said yesterday, the situation in Victoria is a reminder that COVID will remain a part of our world for the foreseeable future. And again, it stresses the importance of maintaining COVID-safe hygiene practices and, importantly, to not hesitate. As the Secretary of Health said yesterday, don't wait, vaccinate. Get in touch when it's your turn and get the jab. Now, please, if you have symptoms, get tested. Stay home if you are sick. Wash and sanitise your hands. Maintain physical distancing when possible when you're out, and check in, and importantly, check into venues and follow the current restrictions using the appropriate app. Are there any questions?
So Tasmanians returning home after 2 p.m. will be able to isolate in their own homes potentially?
They will need to apply and get an exemption. And if they've been to a high-risk premises, they won't be allowed to return because they'll be asked. They will be at the moment being isolated in Victoria. But if they've been in any of the lower risk areas and not to a high-risk premises, then they will be allowed back in under an exemption, isolated in their own home, if that is a suitable premise. If not, they'll be in government accommodation.
What's it going to mean for people who are potentially coming over on the Spirit of Tasmania?
Well, in terms of the same rules will apply, and obviously for those that, in terms of the Spirit, and we've been here before, if you are transiting through Victoria from southern New South Wales or out of South Australia, again you can travel directly to the Spirit Terminal, stopping for fuel, but you shouldn't spend time doing any other activity. Just travel straight to the port and board as you would normally.
Does this designation have a timeline, or it's ongoing?
Well, in terms, we will follow the 7-day period that Victoria have outlined, and obviously we will provide updates as we work our way through this. One would hope that in Victoria that they can get on top of the contact tracing. My understanding is that they are attempting to contact trace more than 10,000 people at the moment, so that is a significant task that they have in front of them. But one would hope that over the 7 days that they can get on top of this and that then we can return to normal post that, but obviously we will be guided by public health advice.
Will we be offering resources to them for the contact tracing if required?
If required, if they ask. Look, there's a standing offer amongst the states and territories at the moment that if another state requires additional resources, then obviously we will provide what we can at that particular time.
And considering there's 2 hours notice, if people are booked in for flights that are, potentially delayed or arriving in 2:30, 3 o'clock, obviously they're going to need to go into quarantine or be turned around. Will there be leeway in terms of hotel quarantine fees?
No, there won't. The rules are that if you arrive after 2 p.m. and if you don't have an exemption, then you would be placed into government quarantine.
Do you have any numbers on Tasmanians who may be looking to return that have been to high risk or low risk locations?
Look, we don't, and obviously now that this change has occurred in Victoria, I'm certain that we will get a number of calls to the Tasmanian hotline as a result. But again, in terms of a Tasmanian that's currently in Victoria at the moment that has been to a high risk premise at the time that's specified, they should be self-isolating now in Victoria.
So what are the latest numbers on the people who have contact with the health department about being at a high risk area?
Well, look, as I said yesterday, there were around 40, but at this stage I don't have an update on that, and obviously we're having calls coming in over the last hour as well since the announcement has been made by Victoria, but we can provide an update.
Just to clarify, those people coming in on flights at 3 and 4 o'clock today, will they have to go straight into quarantine, or how quick is that turnaround to apply for those exemptions?
Anybody coming in after 2 p.m. Will need to go into quarantine, and a Tasmanian returning after 2 p.m. If they are provided with an exemption to return, they will need to quarantine at a suitable premise, or they would be placed into government accommodation.
So those exemptions, the turnaround for those being approved is quite quick, is it?
It'll be as quick as we can do it, yes.
Would there be a case of, if that wasn't turned around in the 2 hours, the person being put into, say, a hotel quarantine while waiting for that to go through, or they then have to go back and come back?
Oh, look, I'm not going to deal with hypotheticals. But again, we will be fair and we will be reasonable, but the rules are as I've just outlined.
In terms of the AFL, are we likely to see additional games played down here instead of in Victoria, or more teams based down here?
Look, Gil McLachlan reached out to me yesterday. I've had to come when we touched base last night via text. I've spoken with him this morning. Now, obviously, it is a moving feast for the AFL at the moment. Again, I'd make the point, and I've been clear right through this, that we would not make any special arrangements or circumstances. They would be treated the same as everybody else. But obviously, if they had teams that were outside of Victoria at the moment that wanted to be domiciled here, that could enter the state, bearing in mind that it's only Victoria that the borders are closed to, then obviously we'd have those discussions.
So Tasmania could be an AFL hub?
Look, I certainly wouldn't rule it out.
So those discussions are underway at the moment, are they?
Well, as I've said, I had a conversation with Mr McLachlan this morning.
Do you think Tasmania could host the Hawks-Suns game this weekend?
Again, look, in terms of depending on the circumstance, there will be no special deals put in place. And my understanding is that those arrangements have already been dealt with.
Was that part of your discussion with Gil McLachlan yesterday, having that game here this weekend?
No, it wasn't.
And so what you were saying with the Spirit of Tasmania people...
And if I could make the point, the games, in terms of no games being here this weekend, it was a matter of broadcasting. Now, that's was the conversation I had with Gil. And in terms of us making an offer for teams that could come into Tasmania that weren't needing to quarantine, we certainly said that we would look to facilitate that. But again, there were other matters that needed to be taken into account. That wasn't possible.
When are you speaking to him again, and when will a decision potentially be made on that?
Well, I think what you will see is as the situation rolls out in Victoria, and as more advice is provided as to the length of the lockdown in terms of Victoria, then I think there'll be more clarity for all of us to consider what we do moving forward.
On clarity, as you were saying before, with people being able to transit through Victoria for the Spirit of Tasmania, will the same be for airports in Victoria? They'll be able to fly in and then fly out as long as they don't leave?
Look, in terms of Tullamarine, that has always remained a transit hub right through this process from day one, and that will remain.
People arriving in caravans, camper vans aboard the Spirit? Are they able to isolate in their caravan, or they have to go into hotel accommodation?
Again, it'll be into hotel accommodation.
Um,
But again, I'd make this point that if they've been to a high-risk premise, they won't be coming in, and after 2 p.m. today, Victoria is declared as a high-risk premise. There should be nobody coming into Tasmania from Victoria with a caravan without an exemption.
There's a website for people to put in their details if they want to get a call, if there's any leftover vaccine. We understand that's for healthcare workers, but it looks like anyone can apply. Can you clarify that?
Look, I can, in fact, and the Secretary of Health might provide some further detail if I don't provide all that you need, but my understanding is that at the end of a given day there might be, for example, additional doses that a vial has been opened, and some have up to 10 doses and we might have only used 4, for example. And so the arrangements are such that potentially anybody that's closer to the hospital, like the police or WorkSafe Tasmania, for example, can apply to be on the list, and they can come in and utilise that remaining dose so that we don't waste anything.
So it's not just generally for members of the public, or?
It's only available, I think, across the public sector, is that right?
Happy to comment.
Yeah,
if you
well,
And
we'll come back to that and I'll ask the Secretary of Health to provide a bit more detail.
Sure. A number of aged care homes in Victoria are yet to receive their first dose of the vaccine, according to the Federal Minister. Do we have aged care homes in Tasmania in a similar situation?
My understanding is that all of our aged care residents have been vaccinated. I'll ask the Secretary of Health just to deal with that matter in terms of the additional jams.
Yeah, and just on that last point in relation to aged care homes, it was our understanding a couple of weeks ago that they were just working through the final arrangements for the final residents. In terms of workers, we are continuing to work to make sure that the aged care workers are coming into our state clinics, and that's the offer that we made to the Commonwealth to assist.
So, as far as you're aware, all aged care homes in Tasmania, all the residents have received that vaccine?
Yes, certainly the information that was reported through to me was that we were expecting those to be completed before the end of May, so that's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And how many workers are still to have that vaccine? What's the sort of numbers we're looking at?
So I'm confident that we've outbound called or attempted to contact all of our workers across our aged care homes. Certainly there are some that we obviously have to do callbacks or have had difficulty reaching. We're also trying the method of actually going in and placing vaccination staff into the aged care homes to encourage the workers to also book and vaccinate. It's just one of those difficult things where they're obviously rostered on. They'd prefer to have the vaccination actually come to them, so we're working with them to make sure that we can get as many workers captured as possible.
And just if you could talk more about the website for people to put in their details if they want to get a call about extra vaccines being available.
Yep, so similar to other states, and I think, for example, New South Wales have had a register where you can register interest if you are close to a particular Pfizer clinic location, and it's Pfizer that it's the main concern around trying to avoid wastage, because once a nurse at the end of the day draws up that last vial and has to distribute doses, if we have had some no-shows or people that have booked in and have been sick, for example, on the day, we want to make sure that those last doses are used. So we have had an internal register that has been running, so you need to be actually located close to the hospital. People have been registering, but it's no guarantee that you'll actually receive a vaccination. It's just a last resort list. But certainly we're happy to have a look at that list and see if it's of benefit to open up more broadly now to the public. But my main concern is to make sure that our over 70s, our over 50s, our under 50s that have an underlying medical condition are actually getting that vaccination first, and we're using every attempt to bring them in. But if there's a wastage concern, we will look to an emergency list.
So can anyone register for that emergency list? Or?
So at the moment, it is actually on a website. It's the way that it's been managed, for example, within health staff or other agency staff that are close to the hospital. And I think that many of you have actually had a look at that link to have a look at it. If we're going to make it more public, that's where I'd look to a public campaign to call on particular age groups to register, but you have to be close to the clinic because it's that end of day vial that we're talking about.
In terms of that online vaccine booking system, can anyone between 16 and 49 now book to have the vaccine?
So the 16 to 49-year-olds with an underlying medical condition is what we're actually targeting in terms of that online booking system. I am aware that there are some that have actually used the online booking system to get through. At the moment, and particularly where there's pockets of vaccine hesitancy, we're not turning anyone away in terms of our clinics. So really, and as the Premier has just mentioned, and given our Victorian situation, it is do not wait, vaccinate, come forward, make the booking, and we'll make sure that our clinics are open for you.
So just to clarify, it doesn't matter if you don't have an underlying condition, anyone at any age can now receive the vaccine in Tasmania?
No, so we do have the phases that we are encouraging because we do have to prioritise our vaccines, and particularly in the 16 to 49 age group, to an underlying medical condition. But I am aware of some that have turned up at clinics and received a vaccination.
So they won't be knocked back, because at the moment quite a few people are booking online and it's all good to go. They won't be turned away when they go to get their jab?
Where there are bookings available on a particular day and we have vaccine to use, we will use them for the people that come to the clinic.
With the current situation in Victoria, have you received more calls to the health hotline today?
Certainly we've seen a pleasing uptick in terms of the number of people that are calling to book a vaccination, and also encourage people to go online and look for a clinic near you in relation to vaccination. And we are looking at opening up further vaccination clinics to respond to that demand.
When and where do you think you'll be opening those clinics?
So we are opening a further clinic at Smithton next week, and we're monitoring demand across our existing clinics and opening up extended hours or further clinics at those locations if we are seeing that vaccination demand come through.
How long do you see this situation with Victoria, Tasmania and Victoria going for?
So as the Premier has announced, we are basically mirroring in terms of the arrangements that Victoria have announced with a 7-day lockdown. Health and our public health team, who are working really round the clock on this, and speaking to our Victorian counterparts and to all of the states and territories looking at their arrangements. So it's a day-to-day, hour-to-hour watching of this situation, and to make sure that we're taking the appropriate measures in Tasmania to respond.
How quick could the process be for a Tasmanian returning home to get an exemption?
So our systems are quite stable and rigorous, and we've managed several lockdowns now over the last few months, and have had to really turn around nearly on an hour's notice in terms of the applications. Certainly from a health side, I'm also concerned to make sure that if I have a doctor or a nurse or other health professional, or even someone that's supporting equipment in hospitals, that they're also able to have their applications turned around and can enter the state. And that goes for other essential travellers, but this is something we've been doing for quite a while. They're very experienced, and we've got all of the resources on to manage it.
Can I just seek clarity on one thing? In terms of Tasmanians who've returned from Victoria since May 6, if they've only been to low-risk areas, will they still have to self-isolate from 2 p.m?
For those that have returned from low-risk areas, they'll need to monitor their symptoms on an ongoing basis. But obviously, I'd make this point very clearly, anyone in the state that has returned from Victoria that has been to a high-risk premise should, and this is a high-risk premise at the time that the positive COVID case was there, they should self-isolate immediately and contact the public health hotline. For those that are in the state that have returned since the 6th, monitor themselves for symptoms, and if necessary, self-isolate and contact public health. Thank you.